Hi, I'm Sumit Bose and this is the Net Hero podcast. Who's it for? It's for you. If you care about the planet and you care about business. We believe that businesses are responsible for a lot of the damage that has been done to the planet, but they're also responsible for finding the solutions. We need innovation, we need ideas, we need people who are trying to make a difference. And that's what this podcast is about. If you know someone who is trying to make a change, then get them to come along on the podcast. Listen in every week, subscribe, and make sure that you follow us on social media. Our two news platforms, Energy Live News and Future Net Zero, cover everything we do. And this episode is recorded live, so enjoy.
Now, yesterday was a big day for me because after 1 year, when I buggered my bloody Achilles, I got on my bike and I rode 15 miles. Now, not a lot, but it's not bad for me. And cycling is one of those things that I probably got into quite late in life, but obviously it's been the thing. Now, I don't wear the life jacket, so don't get into the whole mammal thing. But cycling has been around as a way of transporting humans for about close to 200 years, something like that. And it's had peaks and troughs. But the latest guise of cycling is one that's supposed to help us in the world of net zero. And that is e-bikes. You've seen them everywhere. They're all over the place, mainly left with shopping trolleys outside people's houses. No, I jest. But they've been around because there's been this whole push, particularly it started with the original Boris bikes back in 2010 in London, but also around the country now, to try and get people moving and not using buses, trains, cars, obviously, and using bikes for short journeys. One of the stats that always shocks me is most people use cars for journeys of less than 3 miles a day. So you think about that, couldn't they do that by bike? But are e-bikes the right way to go? Well, joining me today is someone who is a connoisseur of bikes. She's a lady who's got rid of her stabilizer a long time ago, and she is the head of sustainability for a bike company you may have seen in London called Forest. And like I say, Laura Elms joins me today. Hello, Laura.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. Now, people may not know about this kind of your company in particular, and I'll bring you in a minute. But the general thing about kind of bikes and transport, if you look at it, certain countries, China, Holland, they've been doing this for 50, 60, 100 years. They've built transport systems. Even Paris isn't too bad. We've tried to do it in cities across the UK, but generally it's been a bit of a hash, hasn't it, really? So before we talk about what you guys are doing and your whole kind of push on the sustainability, how do you see the state of cycling in the UK, in our cities? I mean, people in rural areas probably get around anyway and do it, but in the cities for sure, there's been a big push. So you've been in this industry, 6 years? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think you're kind of getting straight to the heart of it, really. Regulation is a big thing, particularly for the UK. And we're trying to catch up with a lot of other cities where cycling makes up such a small part of the transport mix relative to particularly our European counterparts. So in the UK, there's been a huge growth, though, since 2020, since about 2019, 2020, it's been sort of relatively exponential growth. I mean, I think we've seen 300% increase in rides over that period of time. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was across the other operators as well. There's been a sort of big push, and I think it came around the time of the sort of Santander Boris bike era as well, in terms of the infrastructure. So London isn't an intuitively easy city to get around on a bike. So they've had to do a lot of sort of trying to retrofit. It hasn't necessarily been particularly coherent in the way they've done it. And part of that is to do with the sort of makeup of the borough, the relationship between those boroughs and a TfL, a sort of guiding force. Has been quite disparate. But having said that, bikes journeys have gone up massively in that period. So we are seeing that shift, and it is hard to sort of overlay it.
So TfL have got stats showing more people are getting on these bikes.
Definitely, yeah, huge numbers. I mean, there's so many more options out there as well. If you look at the Santander bikes, they often track their sort of geographic spread tracks the river. I'm talking specifically in London at the moment. And so that really does limit quite a lot of what you can do. And they're also docked, right? So that also limits it. You need to return it to that dock. And when you start thinking about the city more broadly and spreading bikes up north, east, south and west, you get a much more sort of structure where people can actually make journeys on them rather than them being like a leisure vehicle or a sort of tourist thing for going around a park. But you can actually start integrating them into the transport mix in a more long-term, more sort of solid way.
That was it. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. I haven't been on one of these bikes since one of the Boris bikes. And, Santander, whatever you want to call them, they were big. I hadn't been on any of the electric ones anyway. But the system was, and you see them, there's a docking station, pain in the arse to bloody pay for it, whatever. You get it, you'd ride it. It was like half an hour free used to be. I don't know what the rules are now. And then you have to find somewhere else to park it. So where has that changed now? Because the thing that I think a lot of people doesn't know where you live, because it's in other cities as well. Outside London, you start to get these bikes as well now. One thing that people say is, oh my God, they're just like dumped, right? So Lime bikes, particularly, I've seen a lot of them. Don't really know, I haven't seen many of yours, but these bikes, whatever the brand is, they end up being dumped. So from that original concept of parking docking station to you ride it and you drop it at another docking station, what's the situation now? So, for example, your bikes, where do I pick them up from and where can I leave them?
A good question and a very big question. So what's happened now in London, we have 18 boroughs and that's where we operate in, 18, right. Soon to be more boroughs. And that's a lot of different people, different councils to negotiate with. Unlike every other city, basically in the world, big city, Paris, Amsterdam, any big Barcelona, they have one coherent set of regulations.
A unitary body, yeah.
London likes to do things in its own unique way.
We have to have 32 of them, yeah.
Yeah, we have 32 of them. That's exactly right. So when we are launching in a borough, we have to negotiate with that borough, and we negotiate on things like, do they want free floating? Do they want mandatory parking? Do they want a mixture? I mean, everyone thinks that, of course, you want to have mandatory parking where you allocate a bay and it keeps them really tidy. Now, the problem with that system, particularly in spaces, for example, the City of London, which have very narrow pavements, there isn't much public sort of space.
Yeah.
Those bays will get incredibly oversaturated. They'll start being knocked over. It will cause a nuisance in and of itself.
Which is happened many times, yeah.
But then there are also instances in more of the suburban areas where actually a lot of the users, the riders, and the community more generally actually does want that free floating model. For example, if you have a woman, for example, coming home late at night or just in winter, they don't necessarily want to park their bike in a mandatory bay that's down a dark alleyway because that's the only free sort of space.
And then walk. Yeah.
And then walk. So having that ability to leave them, but hopefully neatly, is something that they like to have the option, that borough likes to have the option. So where it's often put on the operators that these bikes are getting dumped or misparked, actually we pay annual fees per borough in order to support those boroughs in finding a decent amount of allocated infrastructure and retrofitting the city, if you like, to house and hold these bikes responsibly. And so now the process is trying to educate users on it, trying to ensure that financial allocation gets spent wisely on the right parking bays, and trying to sort of question, I guess, which they've done very well in Paris, the infrastructure of the city so that it becomes more bike friendly and the users don't need to leave them in silly places.
So your model now, where would I pick up one of your bikes? Is it just standing on the street? I can just see it's empty and I tap it and off I go. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So you can scan QR code, you've got the app hopefully, or you download the app, you register. Hopefully it doesn't take too long because that often puts users off having a big sort of administrative process.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
And then you get on one and you go. Now, when you look at our map within the app, you can see which boroughs do have mandatory parking, which areas are no parking zones. So, for example, you can't end your ride in one of the parks in London because for exactly the reason you just said, we wouldn't want our...
Yeah.
in a bush somewhere,
Yeah, exactly.
So and you can see that within the map. Unfortunately, what is tricky is that users and Londoners or tourists don't know when they're crossing from Camden into Islington. I mean, it's really... So the user experience as well, when you have that disparate borough thing, it is a bit confused. And so a lot of the thing is around education. But then there's the bigger piece, which is kind of coming back to your very first question is about regulation. So how do we get ourselves to a place where London is catching up with all those other cities and we have one coherent set of rules under TfL? It's very clear, it's set in stone, and we follow that, and it will allow us as well just to be able to sort of take a breath, because at the moment we're sort of fighting all these battles on different lines.
Isn't the problem here that if you've got a bike, say I pick up a bike, let's make it easy. I pick up a bike at outside Camden, right? In the old days when I used to party, I go out in Camden, get my bike, and I ride my bike, and I go up and I cross into, say, Finsbury Park. I'm into Haringey, right? So I've crossed over a couple of boroughs, I've gone through, whatever, and I just leave it there. Okay, I've got to my house, I leave it outside my house nicely. So my first question is, A, do you know where that bike is? And B, how does the next person want to ride it? You just got to rely on someone being in Finsbury Park to get on that bike, haven't you? Or do you go and collect them? What do you do?
It's a combination, really. So there's obviously in the app you can see where there are bikes that are available. So if you have a neighbour around the corner and they wake up in the morning
and they decide the next day, yeah, gotcha.
And a lot of it organically does get moved at those really generic times that you can imagine. So basically commuting times. I think 64% of our riders are using the bikes for commuting. So that's a big part of it. So you see these flows in and out of certain boroughs at certain times of the day. So there's that organic move. And that's something that we're actually trying to encourage more, because it's a very sustainable way of operating a business. So what we now often do is, if a bike hasn't been moved in a while, it's in a stationary place. So your example of where you put one in Finsbury Park, we put it as an estate on the app that's very obvious, called a golden bike. And that golden bike has a much lower cost associated with it. So you'll get 30 minutes free riding to try and bring it back into the city.
Okay.
We also do that rebalancing piece. So we get the teams out there
and pick them up.
Electric vans, pick them up, move them around, whatever needs to be done, particularly in boroughs which get very congested. So I'm thinking Westminster, the City of London, that can cause real headaches. Whereas actually you can quite organically, with your example, find a way to get that bike down to you by changing the price of it and getting them, the users, to move it, if you like, for you in the right direction.
With the whole biking thing, the concept is pretty simple, right? And as I said right at the beginning, let's get more people making shorter journeys by bike, because it's a lot easier. But then people will say, and there's always a question, why the hell do we need electric bikes, right? Why don't we just stick to manual bikes? And isn't there a massive carbon footprint for making these things with electrics? Do they bloody explode? All that stuff that's going on about e-bikes, whatever. So why have you got into that market? And why is that the market that seems to be the market that's growing? Is it just because we're all bloody lazy? I'm finding it very interesting to see. I didn't even know when this thing happened, but obviously now most of the bikes in London, if I'm right, are moving to electric. Is that right?
Yeah, so all of our bikes are electric. Santander have started electrifying their fleet, and our competitors are all electric as well. I mean, there's quite a lot to unpick here, but one thing is longer journeys can be made by bikes. So by electric bikes, and without having to feel like you're covered in sweat at different times of the year. And I know that might seem quite flippant, but it is quite a big one, particularly for that portion of commuters that we just talked about. So, or going between, the other part of it is that often our journeys now are making up part of why bigger journeys. So it's like that first mile, that in between mile, going to a meeting, people jumping on them. So there is a real benefit to having that electric assist. I mean, the strongest one really is just the distances people tend to do on them. Right. So we see a lot of people coming in from Putney into the city. I mean, yes, you might cycle that. You'd probably have your own road bike. You probably wouldn't get on one of the bikes that are made, because they're heavy. Now, getting on that heavy point, you're right. These bikes, they do have a big carbon footprint associated with them. Ours are 35 kilos. And they have a battery, and batteries aren't great for the environment. There is a piece there. And I think the whole industry can see that batteries, I mean, and not just the e-bike, any electric vehicle industry can see that there is a problem with batteries. And the regulation, I mean, a bit like that London piece, is sort of chasing behind the change and the modal shift. But it is getting there, though, I think, with batteries. Now, the batteries one is even more interesting with ours. So our batteries they're made up, obviously, of cells. And within those cells, they're sort of caked in with a cement-like material. And that means that each one of those individual cells is very hard to get to repair. So let's say just 3 of those cells need repairing out of 100. It's very hard to get into them and replace them. So repair of batteries is really challenging. Now, when we look at taking out that cement-like mixture that would make the batteries much more accessible, that increases hugely the risk of theft. So our bikes would start getting, the cells and the batteries would start getting stolen.
Yep.
And the other one is also, which you mentioned, fire risk. So we haven't had problems with fire risk thanks to this cement-like material. So that thermal runaway is protected. So it's kind of the whole point of your podcast, right? What we've got to work out is that cost benefit analysis, and where does it help to start making those batteries more repairable? I think really the next stage is keeping that cement-like material, but being able to recycle them sustainably, whatever that means. I mean, that's a big topic in itself. And in the UK, so the UK has really limited capacity for battery recycling currently. So it's still kind of happening in Europe. So that's chasing behind. The main thing, though, is really modal shift, like getting behavioral change, getting people onto the bikes, making them rethink the fact that they have to get in their car, and changing the city to fit that model as well. That's where the real change towards net zero kind of happens. Of course, we should be looking at our carbon footprint, and particularly scope 3, and working on it. But where you're going to have the most impact is getting more people onto bikes.
I get it. You guys have done some stuff around this. So, I think you say that you power all your stuff with renewable energy, but obviously, you've admitted it there, and it's not a big deal. It's part of life. Everything. This thing's got, embedded carbon. My car has everything it has. So how are you trying to, for example, there's a couple of quick questions, quick fire round. Here we go. So are your bikes from here, or are you shipping them in? Because then there's a carbon footprint. How long do they last? And what are you doing about your batteries and the recycling and the sort of toxic element of that, which every part of this industry is facing?
Yeah. Okay. So our bikes are from Asia. We ship them over here.
Why didn't you get them from here?
Because there just isn't the manufacturers here. I would love for us to make our own bikes, and we work with tailoring them. I mean, something that is really interesting that we've done that is a sector leading is that we've done this sort of second-hand bike project. So when we looked at our scope 3 emissions, as you can imagine, so much, and you've just said it yourself, came from the production and the shipment of the bikes. So we thought, right, how do we mitigate that? How do we reduce it? And we found another operator who was selling, they had the same bike as us, so they also used the same manufacturer, unused bikes. I mean, they were already produced. Obviously, they still have the same embedded carbon emissions to it, but you weren't
making new ones. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
Putting more into the production line. Yeah, and no one's done that. It's obviously it's high risk. You have to get the safety authentication, everything. But it was a way of getting bikes that didn't mean that we were just adding more to the pot. Obviously, as we grow, and we are quite a high growth company, there's not necessarily a second-hand market for that forever. So we have to think about what that looks like long term.
The circularity piece, yeah.
So another part of that now is looking at repairs, which we've done a huge project on in the last 2 years. So breaking down every single one of the bikes and working out how many of those components, some of them we can maybe make ourselves, to redesign ourselves if we need repairs. We don't have to rely on that initial manufacturer of it. We can make amendments. We can work with the manufacturer to try and improve the lifespan of the bikes. We haven't actually got rid of any bikes yet. So that is quite testament to the fact that we really have pushed this repair.
Yeah. How long do you reckon they'll last?
10 years.
10 years.
I reckon. Okay. Let's see. But we have to keep going with it. I mean, the next thing we're doing is stripping all the bikes back and doing a full reboot. And once we've done that in the past, they've got higher net promoter scores than new bikes. So what we found is that when we've stripped our bikes all the way back, every single component, put them all back together again, they've had higher positive feedback from the users than the ones that we've just got new from the manufacturer. So it's there's no reason why we can't keep doing that and investing in our research and development teams to sort of push that. I mean, a bike is a bike, and I know they keep getting new models. And if you are one of the lycra clad,
they can last for 100 years, easy. You look after them, easy.
Exactly. I mean, shared bikes is different, but the fundamentals there are the same. I mean, it's 2 wheels. Yeah. It's got an electric assist engine. So that is what we've got to keep trying to push. Really, trying to keep these bikes in fit state, particularly on London's roads, which isn't easy.
And what about the batteries piece? Because you must be looking at that.
Yeah, we're looking at that. So again, that comes down to having some good communications with the manufacturer, and you've got the EU regulations coming in very soon about a sort of circularity of them. We have partners that we work with that recycle them with the sort of relative sustainability standards that we need. But now it is exploring, and we have explored it already, but maybe returning to that piece around the more modular cells that we can sort of adjust. But there's a big risk to that. And if something were to happen reputationally, where if it came to fire or theft, and we saw one of our competitors, I think it was in Liverpool, actually had a serious incident of sort of theft of the batteries. And you don't know with these battery pilots until you put a scale on the roads. And then at that point, you've invested a huge amount of money. So it is trying to get that balance between the sustainability piece and the sort of financial justification for it that fits into that battery space.
I mean, you're 6 years old, yeah, roughly, the company?
Yeah.
Like that. So have any of those batteries that you first put on your first bike 6 years ago, are they still going or have they died out?
No. So they go to a recycling partner. We have a couple of different recycling partners that the batteries, when they're end of life, will go to.
How long do they last, roughly?
I think it's about 2.5 years.
Okay, so not too bad then.
And it varies massively.
Yeah.
I mean, it also varies with sort of the conditions on the roads, to be quite frank. So, you know, if we have very wet winters like we've had this year, that affects the batteries more than obviously a sort of nice temperate.
Yeah, I get it. Who uses your bikes? It seems to be, from what you've said, it's mainly people, probably youngish, I'd say, not always, but commuting in. I can't see it. And also the other thing is, like, I live in outer London, right? And I know this for nearly all cities. There's plenty of bikes in the centre. There never seems to be anything out in the burbs, right? Now, maybe that's because where I live is very hilly and people don't want to be lugging bikes up here. But this is an issue as well because, there's a lot of journeys around here that could be done, on a bike. If there was a bike station, there's nothing. So is this simply just the economics of demand, right? Lots of people commuting into London, so let's have lots of bike stations there. Is that what's going on?
You have to get a certain riders. You've got to get, in order to make the business successful, you've got to get a number of rides per bike going.
Gotcha.
So, and also the touch points on the bike. So I mentioned that project where we put the bikes on a sort of different state to try and organically move them. I mean, that is really good and that will help us. And we are, by the way, moving. I mean, we are very soon to be sort of expanding geographically, as we always do, but it is getting wider and wider, that catchment area. So you have to have a certain rides per bike. You have to make sure that you still have the touch points with the bike. So even if we don't need to go and actually move them, so what we call rebalance them, we still need to go and battery swap. So once that battery gets to about 20%, we're not going to let a rider take it because they're going to have a terrible time if it runs out when they're on it. So we're going to just turn it offline when one of the team gets up there in an electric van or on a bike themselves, and they'll swap the battery over. So you have to have those touch points, and it has to make financial sense to be able to be making those moves. So, but also the next point is opening different hubs. So we have sort of hubs where the batteries are, where the teams are, where we can change the bikes. Some of it we do on the road, some repairs and mechanics work will happen on the road, but often we need to take them back to a hub, and that's why now we're opening a few different hubs across the city to be able to service more. We are London's only sort of homegrown operator. We only have London. We're a London company, so it's really important for us to do exactly what we were trying to say, which is service like wider areas of London and not keep it to the sort of central areas.
Yeah. I get your bike, off I go. Oh dear, I got a puncture.
Oh no.
What happens then?
Well, that is a problem, but we are soon to be getting some airless bike tyres that are very sustainable. So do not panic. Don't ride for another 2 weeks. No, it's very rare. I mean, it does happen on the roads, but not that often.
So what do? They just call you up and they say, oh, it's flat, and you say, leave it and we'll get you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not carrying a bike pump for those things.
No, you don't want to be doing that. But no, it doesn't happen that often. And I think wider point is about sort of how we keep the bikes sort of fit, particularly when it's a shared object, right? People, I hate to say it, but they're not great with possessions that don't really belong to them. They don't treat them very well. And put on top of that, you're keeping those bikes outside in winter and in London and potholes and whatnot. They do have a lot of wear and tear. And safety is the most important thing. So we have to make sure we have adequate touch points with the bike. We have to make sure we have good communication lines. Like, if a user can report something, then we can go and we'd put it offline if there was a problem, and then obviously get the teams up to sort it out or bring it back to the warehouse.
You look at the wider picture that we said, and I know you're London based, but I think Cambridge has got some, other cities have got these things. There are a couple of things that I want to, before we end, it sort of brings us back to at the beginning. Does there need to be like a uniform policy for the UK regarding these e-bikes, do you think? Because you can get it on, Amazon or other, retail sites. Anyone can buy one. Some battery, we all know what's going on. The London Fire Brigade, other fire brigades, big issues of fires, because there's not safety. You then talk about the whole thing about 32 different boroughs, 32 different rules, let alone different cities. So do you think actually government needs to think about this, that if you want to encourage, as you called it, I think you said the word modal shift or whatever, if you want to get more people doing this thing, we need some continuity so that if I go to Liverpool, I know I'm doing exactly the same thing as I did in London. It would make life easier for everyone, wouldn't it? So have we got to that stage where this is now big enough, the same as we have the same rules for cars all around the country, that we should have the same rules for bikes?
Yeah, and the government is working on that. So the Transport Select Committee is looking into an integrated transport strategy for the UK. And I think integrated is an important part of that. So one of the key points of these bikes is they fit into that sort of whole landscape of mobility in a way that they didn't 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So they're looking into how you integrate that. Now, I think even with London, it's so easy to say, right, let's have a uniform pan-London approach. And I think that is certainly something that we've been pushing for and we want it. But it's not quite as simple as that. I mean, if you look at the setup of a borough like Richmond, it's very different from a borough like Islington. It's very different from Westminster. They've got different needs and different use cases. But you're right, there should be some sort of way of understanding that these bikes are here to stay. They are. There's no way around that. They've done an interesting trial, they've called it, with the e-scooters, and the trial has gone on for, I think, 5 years now.
Oh, God, I hate those bloody things. Don't even start me on those. Don't start me on those things.
No, yeah. So luckily, that's not something that we've ever done or we will ever do. We're not interested in doing e-scooters, but they've proved with that trial that you can do it. You can allocate adequate public space for it.
Yeah.
And also, one thing that I think gets lost a little bit in the sustainability thing is like creativity and creative thinking. I mean, Paris has done that very well. I mean, she might not have been widely accepted for it, and it was quite controversial. But for example, in London, we've got millions. I think it's like 1.2 million or so households with more than 2 cars, and in some cases they're needed. If you've got disability, there's a place for them. But what if we could incentivize people to get rid of that second car, and we could give and cars, I think, are left on the roads for about 90 in London, over 90% of the time they're stationary. If you moved, I think we did 400,000 second cars and allocated that space for bikes, whether it be shared bikes or private bikes, you could have space for 4 million e-bikes, and that would be off the pavement, on the carriageways. It would be out of people's ways. It's controversial and people don't want to do it, particularly with local elections coming up, but it is something that you can do to kind of rethink how the city looks. And so I think maybe trying to think, as well as having these policies that are so broad that you've got to encompass a spectrum of different urban spaces, but also just thinking like, right, what can we do? I was cycling around Trafalgar Square over summer. It was so hot. And I was on one of these bikes, our bikes, and cool. I was cycling next to an HGV, and I just thought, hold on, what do we need to have HGVs at lunchtime going through central London, particularly given that they are the cause of such a large proportion of bike accidents? I don't know if they're necessarily the cause, but most bike accidents are involved. Involved. Thank you. That's a better word. Very diplomatic.
Let's not get sued. I've just pictured, because I was looking at the bikes. Like I said, I don't really notice the bikes much when I go into town, but you've got these ones here, which you've even got a little child seat. Is that right?
Well, no, we haven't launched them. So we sort of have looked into the child seat.
This is another thing that was very interesting, because children are the adults of the future. Their habits, again, my little one, for example, in the winter, did I drive him when it was really miserable? I did, probably a few times. But, I'm trying to encourage him to walk because it's not that far. But, getting a bike would be great. Is there scope, if this is the shift that you're talking about, that we start to go, actually, a family could hire some of these bikes and off they go? Because I've never seen any little kids ones. I assume they don't exist at present. But these are all things that could happen, perhaps. I don't know.
I mean, I've got a cargo bike for my kids. It's not electric, but I enjoy riding it. I think they must, I don't know the stats, but I think if you were to ask one of the big bike shops in London, how much of an increase in cargo bikes have you seen in your sales in the last 3 years, it would be massive. I think they'll have.
Oh, a lot. Definitely. I've seen those, yeah.
And it's happened alongside that shift in infrastructure and the low traffic neighborhoods thing. I think people feel safer. I mean, you just wouldn't take your kids on something that you felt like you were going around next to an HGV or around Trafalgar Square. I mean, you don't see many of them.
No.
So yeah, I think the education piece is important. I think another area that's really important that doesn't get talked about very often is how much it's dominated by men, the cycling space.
Oh, yeah.
And actually trying to open it up to women and then explore, right, what are the barriers to your entry here? Often people say, though, that when they cycle our bikes, it is a barrier to picking up their own private bike again. So that's an interesting one. Yeah, it, because it's actually, some people are intimidated by that e-assist, but actually it does really help. So it gets you going in a way that...
No, I've ridden them. It's not riding a bike. Come on, let's be all right. It's easy as anything. you can actually do makeup, Laura, as you're going. It's that easy.
You could do like people in the tube. I've always wondered why people do it. But the other thing is like getting back to what does cycling mean? It's a bit of a funny one, because when you talked about childhood there, like children love bikes, right? Yeah. You remember when you learned to ride a bike, it was the first feeling of sort of freedom and of getting out and you've got ownership of something. And yes, you might crash it, but that's almost part of the fun.
Yeah, of course.
We've lost that a little bit in a mixture of the sort of lycra clad and unfortunately, I think the shared e-bike, because we charge per minute, right? So there is an element of people rushing and it's become chaotic and it's sort of just that London thing where it's like, oh, I've got to get everywhere 500 times quicker than I actually need to. So I think a big part now we've made this shift, like how do we embed it in a way that brings us back to that? Like, can we go back to the days where we cycled just cycling upright? Maybe you're doing don't do your makeup on a bike, but you're not panicking about it and trying to rush everywhere. You'll just relax.
Enjoying it.
Yeah.
Last thing, cost. How much are yours? Because some of them are different. Some of them you get like, there used to be, I don't know, the Boris bikes, you'd get half an hour free and then you could get... Do you charge like per ride? Is it per hour? And then again, could someone goes, oh, actually, I've got to take it. I assume the concept is I take it, I leave it, go to my work, and then I pick another one up. I don't leave it outside because then there's a charge. So you've got to make it affordable. Is it cheaper than getting the tube the way your bikes are at present? Or is it still one of those things where people go, actually, I'll just get tube, it's quicker? Yeah,
it's 33 pence per minute. You've got an unlock fee. Wow. Yeah, I mean, so yes and no. Then we have about 70% of our users or thereabouts are actually on bundles, which makes it very cheap. So you buy bundle minutes, which reduces down the price.
Okay, like a phone bundle sort of thing. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're using it more regularly, which as I said, with that commuter stat of 64%, most of our users are using them regularly. So most people are now on those bundles rather than the pay-as-you-go model.
Oh, so a bit like a contract then. So you basically pay and then use it as much as you want sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a subscription, but the bundles are the most popular ones. So you pay for like 60 minutes of bundles and you use them up, if that makes sense. So that's on pricing. I'm
not saying that. I mean, I know you've got to put the money in, you've got to build it, you've got to make it affordable. But it does seem quite expensive. 33p a minute. 10 minutes, £3.30. That's a lot.
Yeah, but also bear in mind within that we have had some musings that we should peg our bike prices to the same price as a bus fare. But it is a different proposition, right? We've got to maintain every one of these individual bikes.
Yes.
But also the buses are getting a public subsidy, whereas we're paying to operate. So we're paying per borough to operate. So I totally get it. And I would love to be able to say, let's put all these prices down even lower than those bundles are. And the bundles are...
To encourage more,
encourage more. But the finances just sort of don't balance up. And I think putting too much pressure on shared e-bike companies, which have no public subsidies, to match a bus fare, which does have significant public subsidies, puts a level of pressure on the system that is not worth it, because safety has to come first and maintaining those bikes has to be important. So it is a real balancing act, as probably with, I guess, every business you speak to on this podcast.
Lastly, what's your hope for the whole kind of e-transport? Because it's one of those things where, as I said, literally 5 years ago, no one would do it. Now, and I can see it, the shift is there. Do you really think that now... You've grown a lot, I think. Your company has grown massively, the number of bikes you've put out, so have your competitors. So clearly the demand is there. And I suppose the other thing about e-bikes is it doesn't matter how old you are, because the assist, it makes life a lot easier to ride. So I have seen older people riding these things around. Do you think they're on a rise, basically, over the next 5 years? We're going to just see much more of this as part of our transport infrastructure.
So I've seen since 2020, it was predominantly, and I think you mentioned it earlier, a bit more of a younger generational thing. And actually, we've got data on demographics, and it's shifting away from that much more towards sort of middle age or just having a bit more of a broader spectrum. They've become integrated into the mix as well, such that the young people who sometimes with those not treating them very well as well have moved into a stage where these are just part of the London landscape for them. It's nothing particularly interesting. Like they don't get many kicks out of throwing them in the canal because it's been done. It's what they're like, their older counterparts have already gone and done that. So yes, I think it's very much embedded in. I think as well, because it does rely on that app technology now, there's not much difference in generations with apps. I think everyone sort of, broadly speaking, knows how to use them, whether they do it for other transport modes or not. I think really in order for it to really get to where it needs to get to, which we saw at the tube strikes, actually, like huge numbers of swathes of people moving around the city on these bikes. In order for that to be a norm,
we need
a few
more strikes.
Have a few more strikes. No, we don't support strikes. No, we don't support strikes. But what we do need is to think about the infrastructure and think about the parking. Yeah. I mean, it was your first point, right? It's what people want to talk about straight away, these bikes being discarded places. So let's find the space for them. Like the demand is there. We need to find the space. And then things will come together more organically. And they already are when you look at cycle super highways and the kind of connectivity across the city, that's getting there. But the main piece is around parking.
Yeah. And International Women's Week, and you said right at the beginning, we need to get more girls and women out on bikes and all that. It's good to see you representing your company and out there. This has always been a thing in the sustainability, and I'm not like going to run some PC campaign, but we do need to encourage more women to use cycling. It is, when I see all the bikes around me, it's all blokes, right? It's all blokes in lycra doing their whole thing. Maybe you see the odd girl there. So what's your message to women to get back on a bike, really?
Yeah, I think the electric assist has been a barrier to entry for a lot of women. Yeah. So and this is sort of anecdotal as well as looking at the stats. When I talk to women, for example, in our office, they'll say they were nervous about getting on an e-bike. Now, very few men that I speak to say that they were nervous. Maybe they were, but they just don't say it. But then once they've got on it, they actually feel more confident on a private bike as well. So it is that fear of the kind of entry into it. But also it comes across, I mean, it's not just cycling. And by the way, we have about 30% of our users are women. So it's not wild. I mean, it's not great, but
no, it's better than 5%. Yeah,
it's better than 5%. It's also better than our peers, I would say. So for some reason, our bikes attract women more. But there's also something around lowering seat posts, so it's a little bit better for shorter, and women tend to be shorter than men. And then the final piece, and I know this is a little bit maybe too broad for an answer, but it's looking at the whole piece. I mean, we've just recently funded women and girls football teams across the city. We need to be finding balance across not just bikes, but also transport. I mean, I was reading some LinkedIn post on the very limited numbers of women executives in the transport industry as a whole, but also just like getting those girls out there and having as much fun as you would if you were a boy. So that's part of it, really, getting people out there, getting people on them. And once they're on them, we can fit the rest in, building that confidence.
Lovely. And lots of room for shopping. For my wife, she'd need that. So you make sure you put that in the bag, then that'll be up.
Although it tends to be my husband in our family that does more shopping. So
there you go. That's exactly it. Listen, been a pleasure. Best of luck with what you're doing for us. I think it's very good because it's important to get people, and even just for for whatever the footprints for these things, they're much better than people getting in cars, and they're much better for their health. So best of luck with what you're doing, Laura.
Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. What do you think, ladies and gents? Would you jump on an e-bike? Will you be getting your kids out on cycles this weekend? Let us know. Get in touch on the comments. Remember, if you want to be on the podcast, it's nethero@futurenetzero.com. And my thanks to Sohi for production this week. See you next time.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.